episode is just me because I want to explain my skepticism about the research we get from academic psychology. If you want to read this message in written form, the link is in the notes below. Readers often ask my opinion on the science they find in books, news, and podcasts, and I often disagree with it, but I don't say that because it would take too long. So I decided to create a full statement of why I don't trust the information we get from academic psychology. Science is not supposed to be filtered through a belief system. It's supposed to go wherever the facts lead. But the human brain doesn't work that way. Our brain zooms in on details that fit preconceptions and skims over details that conflict. We don't do this consciously, so we believe in our own objectivity. And we trust the objectivity of researchers because they have high status in today's world. As a result, we don't notice the belief system used to filter the facts. The belief system I'm talking about is Rousseau's idea that nature is good and civilization is the cause of all that's bad. Researchers may not say this openly, but their findings always happen to fit the belief that peace and love are the default state of nature and problems are due to our society. They claim that cooperation and harmony are the natural state by producing studies showing cooperation and harmony among animals, children, and hunter-gatherer people. When there's conflict among animals, children, or hunter-gatherers, they ignore it or they blame our society. In the past, people would not have believed such studies because animals were easily observed in the wild. People saw animals attack each other, so they'd laugh at you if you said animals live in harmony. In the past, people were attacked by neighboring tribes and surrounded by squabbling children. So they'd question the assertion that humans are naturally cooperative. Today, we tend to believe these presumptions because we're told that the science proves it, and you're dismissed as an anti-science nut if you disagree. This is not just a philosophical debate because public policy is rooted in the Rousseauian paradigm. It tells us that problems are caused by society, so we can solve problems by removing social constraints. The Rousseauian paradigm tells us that children are born good, so if we leave children to do whatever comes naturally, they will grow into happy, responsible adults. The Rousseauian paradigm tells you that society has caused your unhappiness, so tearing down society will make you happy. If Rousseau was wrong, these policies will go wrong. I accepted the Rousseauian template when I was young because I respected my teachers. And what young person doesn't like the idea that tearing down society will make you happy? But as the decades went by, I kept having experiences that didn't fit the narrative. Here's a simple example. I trained to be a docent at my local zoo in order to learn more about the animal brain. One day I was asked to donate money to a mountain lion sanctuary. It was explained as a way to rescue wildcats who wander into the suburbs of San Francisco. I asked why they couldn't just bring the animals back to nature. They didn't answer, so I repeated the question a few times. Finally, I was told that a mountain lion would be killed instantly by the animal whose territory it was left in. I knew that was true because I'd read about territoriality in old biology books. I learned that animals kill their own kind for a long list of reasons. In fact, they attack whenever they think they'd win. They rarely fight because one critter realizes it would lose and backs down. So you could say they live in peace most of the time, but that's a profoundly dishonest representation of the facts. This story has an interesting twist because zookeepers have to manage the reality of animal aggression, even as they hate to acknowledge it. Zookeepers are eager to protect their animals, which puts them in the awkward position of taking precautions but not wanting to say why. They'll build a fence for an animal without saying that its neighbor would kill it without the fence. I heard a lot of euphemisms in my 5 years at the zoo, which I explained in my book, Status Games: Why We Play and How to Stop. You may not agree with what I'm saying. You may think academics couldn't all be filtering facts to fit a belief system. You may call me a conspiracy theorist. I would have agreed with you when I was young, but after decades as a college professor, I've seen the research process up close. I'm like a person who visits a sausage factory and then refuses to eat sausage. Let me tell you how the sausages of academic psychology are made. Researchers insist that they only care about the greater good and don't care about selfish rewards. But they are highly rewarded if they create evidence that advances the Rousseauian agenda. Any graduate student can see which findings get respect and which do not. The grad student who conforms ends up with the credentials necessary to be included in the science. If they don't conform, they're ignored. And if they keep it up, they're discredited, personally or professionally. A researcher can get conforming results more easily than you may expect. They just rerun a study over and over with slight changes until they get data that fit the paradigm. Results that advance the agenda get media attention, and the rest are forgotten. Studies are rarely replicated, so research cited as the science for years may rest on the flimsiest foundation. For example, we often hear that our hunter-gatherer ancestors worked 4 hours a day and spent the rest of the time making love and making art. It feels true because it fits the belief that life was easy before our society ruined things. So we don't inspect the mountain of assumptions and extrapolations that this Harvard study rests on. In my decades as a college professor, I kept stumbling on facts that didn't fit the paradigm. I kept finding evidence of conflict among animals, children, and hunter-gatherers. So I asked myself, who was this Rousseau guy, and why should I believe him? I did some research and was shocked by what I found about the 18th century Swiss writer. Jean-Jacques Rousseau fathered 4 children with his housemaid and brought each newborn to an orphanage because he didn't want them to be raised by a housemaid. This is the man who literally wrote the book on raising children, the book Emile that's so widely revered in education circles. You were raised by Rousseau's theory because teachers had to embrace it to get their credentials. I was frustrated by life in the sausage factory, so I accepted the offer of early retirement that came my way. I kept up my spirits by remembering Kuhn's theory of paradigm shift. Thomas Kuhn said that scientists are good at finding evidence that fits their models and good at ignoring evidence that doesn't fit. Even when a huge pile of conflicting evidence accumulates, the model endures. Scientists find ways to discredit what he calls discrepant data. It's not until they die, said the optimistic Professor Kuhn, that a new model is spread by a new generation that grew up with the discrepancies. Then the cycle starts over, and the new orthodoxy is vehemently defended from conflicting evidence. Kuhn wrote this in 1962. He reminds us that Galileo was jailed for violating the paradigm of his day and was lucky he wasn't burned at the stake. Copernicus didn't dare publish until he was on his deathbed. Today's brand of enforced conformity is mild by comparison, yet it's enough to bury discrepant data from public awareness. You don't question the Rousseauian mindset because you've heard it so much that it just seems true. My goal here is not to criticize academics. My goal is to teach you the facts about happiness that I discovered after my early retirement. I learned that our brain evolved to keep our genes alive, not to make us happy. It releases happy chemicals when you do things that help your genes survive. It doesn't decide this with conscious logic. It decides with a limbic system that's the same in all mammals and with neural pathways built from your own early experience. This is why we seek happiness in quirky ways. But your inner mammal can't tell you in words why it's releasing happy chemicals because the animal brain doesn't process language. That makes it easy to blame something outside you for the quirky things you do in the quest to feel good. I had never heard these simple facts, though I had studied psychology all my life. Let's see how the Rousseauian lens distorts the facts about dopamine, serotonin, and oxytocin. Dopamine causes impulses that academics don't approve of, so they tend to muddle the facts to obscure its true function. Dopamine is released when a mammal sees a new way to meet a survival need. But it sounds selfish to focus on your own needs, so academics avoid this core fact of life. Academics insist that rewards don't make us happy, so they can't accept that anticipating a reward is what triggers the joy of dopamine. They ignore the survival focus of our motivational system because they imagine our ancestors effortlessly picking fruit from trees. Most important, academics don't explain the way dopamine causes the urge for more. Our brain habituates to rewards you already have, so you have to find more to keep triggering it. Academics blame society for that constant urge for more, so they can't admit that it's natural. Instead of explaining the core job of dopamine, academics focus on virtuous-sounding, quasi-spiritual anecdotes like the joy of watching the stars. Then they raise concerns about too much dopamine or too little, as if it would be just right all the time if our society hadn't messed things up. In recent years, academics have developed the theory that dopamine causes wanting, but not liking. This is offered as proof that addicts do not get pleasure from their behavior. If you question the theory of wanting versus liking, you are accused of hating addicts. No one wants to be condemned as a hater, so the theory is rarely questioned. In my opinion, it's a false dichotomy. Liking is the dopamine you got the first time you met a need with a particular behavior, and wanting is the dopamine triggered by the pathway created by the first time. I don't think addicts are helped by this theory, even though it's propounded in their name. In the short run, it feels good to hear that your addiction is not your fault, but in the long run, it's disempowering. Would addicts be better off learning about their power over their actions instead of being taught that they are powerless in the eyes of science? It's a reasonable question, but it would be career suicide to ask it. Science is supposed to be a conversation in pursuit of truth, not a doctrine imposed by high priests with the power to excommunicate non-believers. The theory of wanting versus liking feels good now, but hurts us in the long run. Ironically, that's what addiction does. So it would be fair to say that the theory is selling addiction. You may have gotten addicted to the "it's not my fault" view of life after buying the sausages of academic psychology. Their view of dopamine cuts you off from your own reality. You can't accept your own impulses because that would make you greedy and selfish in the mindset you've learned. So you accept the theory that society caused your impulses. You learn to blame the burger company when you eat a burger, the alcohol company when you drink alcohol, and the media company when you spend time on media. This undermines the skill of taking responsibility for your actions. It trains you to feel like a victim of external forces. That's not good for you, but it's good for those who wish to build an army of discontent. The academic approach to oxytocin has the same problem. It sifts for facts that fit utopian beliefs and obscures the self-interest inherent in natural impulses. For example, oxytocin motivates a gazelle to run to the herd when it smells a predator. The gazelle is trying to save itself, but academics represent this as pro-social behavior. In reality, stronger gazelles push their way to the center of the herd, leaving weaker individuals exposed to predators. But researchers find anecdotes that suggest altruism and construct laboratory experiments that present altruism as the norm for animals. This hurts you by creating unrealistic expectations. You think others should sacrifice themselves for your interests as you sacrifice for theirs. But you are not an objective judge of your own sacrifices, so you end up getting outraged about the self-interest of others a lot. You would be better off with realistic expectations. Then you would notice your own self-interest and build the skill of navigating a world full of self-interested mammals. Instead, you are taught that our society has failed and tearing it down is the path to happiness. The biological functions of oxytocin are well known. It triggers maternal labor and lactation and the urge to protect. The selfish aspect of parental behavior doesn't get much attention, but it's important to understand. The survival of your genes depends on the survival of your children. You don't consciously care about your genes, but natural selection built a brain that rewards you with happy chemicals when you promote the survival of your genes. Children do that more than anything, so nurturing children triggers a lot of oxytocin. Receiving protection triggers oxytocin even more than giving it. We are born with an urge to get protection from others because we're born with needs that we can't meet. Our survival depends on the protection of others, so our brain creates life or death feelings about getting it. Childhood eventually ends, and we have to meet our own needs, but that urge for protection is still there. Stress results, and academics blame society for that stress. They tell you that a good society would always meet your needs and make you feel safe. So our society is bad. This view is quite appealing to a young person about to face the world. But let's look at all the facts instead of sifting them through Rousseau's filter. Animals are pushed out of the nest at a young age. Monkeys are never given solid food, so they don't eat until they figure out how to get it themselves. Human children contributed to their own support for most of human history. They knew that they had to milk the cow in order to have butter. The mammal brain is designed to learn survival skills and motivate effort, not to be tended like a pet or a potted plant. The reason for this is simple. Parents died young in the state of nature, so a species could only survive if its young learned survival skills before the parents were gone. You've been told that it takes a village, but in the animal world, a juvenile usually dies if its mother dies. Oxytocin evolved to help young mammals build new bonds to replace the maternal bond. But it's hard work because potential allies are focused on their own needs rather than yours. You must learn the skill of reciprocity in order to enjoy the oxytocin of social support. You don't learn the skill when you're taught that society should meet your needs and others should be altruistic. Academic social science trains you to see the nice oxytocin feeling as an entitlement rather than something you have to work at. When your oxytocin dips and you long for social support, you blame society because that's what you've been taught. Serotonin is similarly misconstrued. The belief in a natural utopia obscures the long-standing evidence that animals compete strenuously for food and mates. Mammals mediate this conflict by building social hierarchies. Each mammal is aware of when it's in the position of strength and when it's in the position of weakness. Serotonin is released when a mammal sees itself in the position of strength, and that creates the good feeling of confidence in your ability to meet your needs. These facts are uncomfortable, so academics teach you to see the good feeling of serotonin as an entitlement. The truth is that no one has the good feeling of serotonin all the time. If you have high status in one aspect of life, your brain dwells on your areas of weakness. The more status you have, the more you worry about losing it. Our brain is not designed to release serotonin all the time for no reason. If it did, little monkeys would act like jerks near big monkeys and get themselves killed. Our brain is designed to release serotonin only in those moments when self-assertion would actually promote survival. This is not an easy truth to accept. It's more enticing to think that you've been deprived of serotonin by some sort of societal failure. Academics link serotonin to puppies and rainbows instead of acknowledging its role in social confidence. They use words like levels and balance to imply that your body should produce it all the time for no reason. And if it doesn't, you should get it from the medical system. Academics are highly competitive and status-seeking in their own lives, but they insist that social rivalry is a sin of society rather than a natural impulse. The pecking order of chickens was the subject of a PhD dissertation in 1921, and since then, the urge for social dominance in animals, children, and hunter-gatherers has been widely documented. But you have to get the facts from moldy old books because writers in the internet age don't mention it. I have recently gathered the facts in my book, Status Games. So, where does this leave you? You can't change the world, but you can decide what you believe in the privacy of your own mind. You get to decide how to interpret your emotions and whether to buy the sausages of academic psychology. The point is not to find fault with academics, but to find your power over your emotions. I found that power by learning about the mammal brain. I created the Inner Mammal Institute to help others do the same. That was 10 years ago, and I keep creating new resources to help more people get the facts. I just released a new online video course that helps you blaze new trails to your happy chemicals in simple steps. You can find it at innermammalinstitute.org/course. My goal was to make it fun because I know how hard it is to leave the old trails in your brain. Anyone can build new trails to their dopamine, serotonin, and oxytocin. The first step is to accept your natural urges instead of blaming society for them. You have power over your dopamine when you see how it motivates you to seek more. You have power over your oxytocin when you see how it motivates you to seek protection. You have power over your serotonin when you see how it motivates you to seek status. You may think you shouldn't care about status or protection or getting more, but ignoring these natural impulses gets bad results. You feel like a victim of external forces because you don't know how you're creating those impulses internally. You end up feeling bad because you refuse to give your inner mammal what it needs to feel good. I'm not saying you should do bad things to spark happy chemicals. I'm saying you can spark them in healthy ways when you understand the job they're designed to do. The Rousseauian worldview does not lead to happiness. It leads to unrealistic expectations and bitter disappointment. So, why do we cling to it? Because it's nice to believe in peace and love. It's nice to think happiness is your birthright and you've been wrongly deprived. It's nice to trust the high priests of social science. More important, it's hard to change your mental model of life. It's hard to even see that you have a mental model. You don't notice it the way a fish doesn't notice water. It's easier to change your mental model when you have an alternative. Now you have an alternative. The inner mammal model reminds you that our brain evolved to promote survival, not to make you happy. Your happy chemicals are controlled by the limbic system that all mammals have in common, not by your verbal human cortex. Animals can't talk, so your inner mammal can't tell you in words what makes it feel good. Your verbal human cortex can come up with fancy philosophy, but if you want happy chemicals, you have to get them from your inner mammal. Here's a thought experiment that will help you build a new mental model. We're told to avoid food that grandma wouldn't recognize as food. So why not avoid labeling your emotions in ways that grandma wouldn't recognize? She didn't consult the DSM when she felt bad. She just focused on her next step. You will feel good if you focus on your next step toward meeting your needs instead of blaming your emotions on things outside your control. You can manage your brain the way Grandpa managed his car. He spent a lot of time trying to improve its performance and took great pride in that. Today, you're told that your car is too complex, so you should leave it to an expert, and you get the same message about your brain. But you can spend time tuning up your brain and take pride in your skill at doing that. In the short run, it's easier to stick with the mental model you have and the model approved by the high priests of academia, but that's not science. Science does not achieve consensus by ridiculing and attacking people who question it. When I hear people point to the science and then ridicule or attack people who disagree, I know they are not practicing science. They are practicing a religion. Religions have high priests who decide what is true. They define right and wrong for everyone, and you're supposed to accept it on faith. Most people submit because that defines you as a good person, and because the high priests turn the herd against you if you don't. Throughout human history, high priests have shaped perceptions of reality until new priests supplant them with a belief in a new system. To me, academic psychology is a mafia as well as a religion. I'm interested in mafias because my grandparents were Sicilian. Mafias extract resources for themselves by creating a social alliance that persuades through intimidation. It's easy to feel intimidated when the risk of social ostracism is so high. And it's tempting to believe you'll be happy all the time if society were fixed. So it's not surprising that the Rousseauian worldview is so popular. But in the privacy of your own mind, you have a choice.